everybody, and thanks very much for being here with us in Science Gallery Dublin. We're very pleased to welcome you to this event. So we have, the reason I suppose behind this and why we're doing this is that here in Science Gallery we've been taking a couple of weeks out of our schedule to reflect on the past 12 years that we've been operational here, and to think about the future, to think about our strategy, and to think about our values and our mission. So one of the big things that we've really been interested in are questions around open access, open scholarship, open science, and also the role of activism and science activism and what that might mean. So we're very happy today to have our own director and the executive director of Science Gallery International, Dr. Andrea Bandelli, who's going to be in conversation with Professor Linda Doyle, our Dean of Research here in Trinity College. So we've also produced this event in collaboration with the Unboxing Open Scholarship series, so I'd like to invite Shane Collins to come up and join us to tell you a little bit more about that. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Your fire exits are here on my right, and also the doors that you came in through, and please just switch your phones off during this event. And the event will be live streamed, so if you do want to ask a question at the end, you may be on record. Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks, Mairead, and thanks to everyone for coming out. We're delighted to have Andrea and Linda here with us. And I'm not going to delay too much because we want to get straight into it. But the Unboxing Open Scholarship series has been about trying to figure out where Trinity wants to position itself within the open scholarship and open research world. And so this is the first type of engagement we've had with open education and its related concepts. So we're looking forward to a fruitful discussion today, and please, we'll have microphones as well, so we can go around to the audience, and please feel free to participate throughout as well. So please give a warm welcome to Andrea and Linda.
Wonderful, thank you so much, and once more, thank you, Linda, for agreeing to be here. As Mairead said, this is indeed is a very, very interesting time for Science Gallery. We literally took 2 weeks to think about our future. Science Gallery has always been, I think, really at the forefront of new ideas and pushing indeed the boundaries of art, science, education. This is a particularly interesting time also because we, thanks in fact to the global network, and there are galleries in London, Melbourne and other 6 cities, we see how essential actually Science Gallery is to the university. And therefore a lot of the conversations these 2 weeks are really how to make this, how to be part of the university in with even more value. And the way we do it here, of course, because it is indeed always a little bit unconventional and if you want, indeed, boundary pushing. So I would like actually just to start with some of the words that were in the invite. And the first sentence is actually really interesting. Say, universities were a birthplace of radical ideas, and now they are, these conservative, slow-moving beasts. Is it really the case? Because I would argue that actually, and I love being in a university because I think it's the place that it can be most progressive and really, open to new ideas. And I say, you can. The great thing of Science Gallery, you can do anything as long as it's legal because we are in a university. Can we reclaim that role at least?
So I suppose, as a general response to that comment, I think it's absolutely true that in a university, and a university like Trinity, there are lots of people with new, radical and different ideas. Okay, I think that's true in Science Gallery and throughout the university. I think what's also true is that it's a slow-moving, complicated, bureaucratic system in which those new ideas sit. And giving effect to the new ideas can often be complex and challenging. And I think that's the kind of tension. So it's not that there are a lack of new ideas, it's putting them into effect can be cumbersome. And I do think this is where we benefit from a huge long history where, the answer to a lot of things is that we've done that for the last 400 years like that, why would we change it? We benefit from, I suppose, that history, but we also suffer from that history with that kind of an answer. So I do think it's great to to take time like you're taking and to kind of think what you're doing. And I just had one other thing, and it's an example I use myself. So I'm in the role I'm in now 2 years, and when I started the role, I kind of felt I was unencumbered by some of that stuff I spoke to you about, the kind of the system, and I was able to think more freely. And I find myself even you just automatically get into the system way of doing it too much. And I an example I use, and I'm just saying this as well, we have a research awards out at the moment, and it's open to any member of staff in Trinity to nominate anyone else for an award that best reflects how people in Trinity live the research charter principles that we have. But initially, when I went about trying to do research awards, I got locked into a very traditional way of thinking, and it was thanks to Jenny Daly, who's sitting up there, who reminded me to stop thinking traditionally. I was looking for Researcher of the Year and Early Career Researcher of the Year, and she made me stop thinking too traditionally. So I think loads of great ideas in a very traditional system, and you're constantly juggling those two.
Yeah, there is a quote I like, and I use when I speak about Science Gallery. It comes from a book that Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, wrote. Says, we live in we deal with 21st century technology with a 20th century mindset in 19th century institutions. Probably it's also in this case 16th century institutions, but there is actually the technologies we use today, which however shape a lot of the world we live in and society, are indeed the 21st century technologies. But we think, at least I'm in the 20th century way, and indeed our institutions are so heavy. So I think thinking about open scholarship, there are indeed many initiatives that the Trinity is doing, and maybe if you want to also touch on those. Here, I think when I was getting knowledgeable about all this, there are two key elements basically that strike me. One is indeed the word activism, and the other one is fearlessness. Now we had a conversation about fearlessness, which I would love to discuss a little bit more before we go into how you nurture this fearlessness in education. And I want you indeed to say your definition or your things about fearless, because it's so nice. But for me, it is a beautiful value, because it's not about just being, the maverick and bold and doing things, but it's also being without fear. And there's such a, we live in a society where, especially politics, and so it's dominated by fear. Fear is a kind of is our decision-making system. And I say fear is an alert system. It's not a decision-making system. So instilling this sense of being fearless is actually really, really beautiful. And I think, also is one of the values for Trinity in terms of education, to shape fearless students and researchers.
So maybe that's a very big question. So okay, maybe if I just put it into a few different parts. So the reason why we were talking about fearlessness in the first place in a previous conversation was linked to the fact. So I have the great privilege of working with when I used to do research, as distinct from point at research is what I do now, working with academics with an engineering background and also working with artists a lot. And there are many things that I love about working with artists, but one of the things I found the most compelling was the fearlessness to which they tackle new topics. So very often in engineering, for example, if you know something about engineering in a particular area, you kind of very quickly say this other engineering area isn't my area, and you kind of shy away from it. Whereas I think artists, and certainly the ones that I've been lucky enough to work with, are completely open to not being daunted by that idea, and I suppose really embracing it. So that's how we're talking about that in the first place, the role of creative practices, and we're talking about it in the context, I suppose, of the Science Gallery and its future. And I think the Science Gallery can bring that kind of fearlessness to dealing with topics. I find people here are never daunted with the latest cutting-edge research and technologies, and engaging with that and having conversations about it. So I suppose that's the first bit. The second bit, in the context of open scholarship, so what we've been trying to do for the last year and a half, and I think, we've had some successes and some not, is trying to grapple with, as a university, what does open scholarship mean for us? So I should say we use the phrase open scholarship rather than open science on purpose. So in a continental European context, the word science is kind of associated with knowledge and kind of Wissenschaft in general. And here in Trinity, I think we have to be really, really careful that we don't use a word that might exclude certain disciplines. So therefore, we use the word scholarship. So in the context of open scholarship, I think there is a lot of things to. There's a lot of people who are really, really engaged and really interested, and there's a lot of genuine fear in the system of new ways of doing things. And the reason for that, I suppose, boils down to a couple of things. So one of the key things it boils down to is that academic status is understood in a very specific way. And you understand that your work is valid and your work is important because you publish in specific journals or because you get a particular kind of accolade within a particular structure in the system. And I suppose what open scholarship is asking us a lot is kind of explode that myth and to look at things in a totally new way and to understand the value of research and the importance of research and the impact research can make, not necessarily with the old scaffolding and structures. So I think fearlessness comes in there as well. Now by that, I don't mean a railroading of new ideas. That's not what the fearlessness is about, railroading ideas in, but it's certainly very much about maybe questioning yourself and what you've relied on for years to understand why you matter and saying, okay, the world is changing around us. And I think a completely, really, really important point here is that I'm here many decades now. I'm on the old side of things. I'm kind of established in my career, but there's open scholarship does ask for early career researchers to be more fearless, because what we're saying to early career researchers is the world is changing and the way we measure things is changing, and you have to now span those two things. You have to span the old world where they were measured in this way, and you have to span the new world where they're measured in a totally different way, and that's very scary, and we're asking for an awful lot of fearlessness in that situation as well. So that word is useful everywhere, Andrea.
Great. Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And just on that, actually, yesterday we had Ruth Freeman from SFI here. She mentioned the San Francisco Declaration of Research Assessment, which I think goes in this direction of...
It does, yeah. So the DORA declaration is a declaration that basically talks about you being able to speak about the value of an individual and their research without referring to a journal impact factor. So some people here will be familiar with that notion and others maybe not. LIRU, the League of Research Intensive Universities that we're part of, has signed up to that. Trinity isn't explicitly signed up to it, but it actually is going to become an obligation for us. So, so one thing that's happening in this space, lots of people here will be familiar with this. So there's a kind of carrot and stick thing operating. So funders and national bodies are putting obligations in place to make us change our behaviours. Which I think a lot of people feel, going back to your comment about universities and institutions, to make institutions change behaviours, you do need to push a bit. So it'll become obligatory for us to have signed up for DORA and do other things in association with open scholarship over the next few years.
And do you see in that framework also engaging with Science Gallery, for instance, for researchers, we do have evidence, stories of how changing that is for research and how beneficial it is really to learn to communicate better, of course, but also in terms of personal qualities, and we'll see in a moment how important those qualities are, in terms of emotion, interpersonal communication, and so forth. Do you see, however, a way that these benefits can be kind of formalized in a sense? Because
I do. I mean, I don't know the answer to how exactly we do all of this stuff, but so I'd say first of all that sometimes people talk about research communications in a superficial way, and so the Science Gallery for me isn't about. So you, when I look at all of your collateral, it always looks beautiful, and your videos are fantastic. But that to me is not the point. Okay, I would like videos to look better, but that's so what the communications aspect does is twofold. It's about you talking to the people out, in the world around you, but it's also about you talking to yourself and through the new vocabulary, seeing different things in your research and different things and understanding things in different ways. And that two-way thing to the self and outwards, to me, is really, really important role that you guys play, because it makes you think differently, it makes you speak differently, and therefore it makes you crack open your research and potentially have the ability to describe the impact in different ways. So the word impact, you might seem like a completely inoffensive word, but in fact, actually, there are loads of people who hate the word impact. I went to a very interesting talk by a philosopher ages ago. Apparently, philosophers and mathematicians, I know Dimitri's here, are the people who hate the word impact most, according to that woman. And I get it completely as well, because there's a lot of people doing research who feel, you're driven into this very functional, utilitarian way of describing why you're doing research. So it is so important to be able to just investigate because, but it's also so important to explain why you're doing that. And I think there's also very low-hanging fruit about fantastic impact we do make that we just don't. So I think there's a huge role for the Science Gallery in this. And I think the role needs to be more aggressive, and I'm using the word aggressive in kind of a nice way. I think that role, I think you can use the tension more productively. I think a lot of the time, I think there's space for challenging to happen more than it does, I would say. You could say that's a load of rubbish back, So.
No, that's well, in fact, I mean, we looked at the role of mediators and how working in Science Gallery as a mediator, and many Trinity students do that, impacts actually their lives. And we use a methodology which is called the most significant impact.
Oh, really?
So we did this research last year.
So how does that work?
It is, we collect stories from the mediators, asking them what is indeed, how this experience, this program, changed their life in the most significant way. And then there are two panels of people reading that, and you have categories. So it's a very well structured methodology to assess something without setting beforehand the expected results. So it's very good for community programs. And we found out actually that the most significant impact indeed in the mediators is, apart from self-confidence, which is great. I mean, just having something in Trinity that improves the self-confidence of students but also attention to social justice.
That's very interesting.
That's really good, exactly. Perspective on career choices and confidence in interdisciplinary topics. So all these are things that can be assessed. I wouldn't say, measured to some extent, but definitely assessed and validated by research of the impact indeed of working in Science Gallery. So it's and I think we can expand it, and we can see also how indeed engaging with Science Gallery as a researcher, being part of the programs, of the exhibitions, actually impacts their own lives. And so actually this leads to a slide I want to show. So how do you nurture that? How do you create indeed the conditions in education that lead to researchers that have all these qualities? But
can I just say one thing just before you, because just the social justice word is really interesting. We're noticing that as well. Students, undergraduates, when they graduate now, are very questioning of the companies and the ethos of the companies they join in a way that mightn't have mattered as much before. But I just want to make sure I link it back to open scholarship. Open scholarship doesn't talk about social justice, but there's a huge amount of social justice built into it, because there's an enormous interest in how you treat people fairly, how people get skilled and trained fairly, how you share things openly. Huge amount of interest in how the Global South feeds, the Global North feeds the Global South. More importantly, how the Global South feeds the Global North, which we often forget. So I actually think, I mean, Shane and various people here have done lots of work on open scholarship. We haven't been using that phrase social justice in the context, but you've just, this is why I think Science Gallery is great. You've just made me think about it in that context.
Fantastic.
So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's great, fantastic. Actually, in terms of democracy, so if I can just, a small parenthesis, a little while ago, I got interested in blockchain for science, which is basically the extreme version of open science. And it's something that, what I liked is actually the democratic aspect of that. So I don't know how the conversation progresses and the technology, so blockchain is still, but it's so wonderful actually to read the writings of people who are thinking about blockchain as basically the extreme form of democratizing science, where everything becomes so transparent. So it's beautiful for those of you who are interested in that to dive a little bit into that.
I think we should. That would be a great topic to explore.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So no, just indeed, what I would like is this is a recent report from a study done from the World Economic Forum about the schools of tomorrow. So this refers mainly to secondary education, so not university. But these are the identified areas, basically, the content and the experiences that are key to create indeed the youth and to shape the youth of tomorrow. And as we can see, I mean, it's just going around this, and maybe we can see how they map this into Trinity and your reflections on this. But global citizenships, really to be, indeed, it is about democracy and about being part of the community and being indeed aware of the world outside of the school and your community. Innovation and creativity, I mean, we can't stress enough how important that is. Technology skills, and I think that's indeed going, the narrative of the World Economic Forum, among others, is the fourth industrial revolution, which is basically this confluence of technologies from neuroscience, blockchain, material science, and so technology is really shaping. And also there is the whole discussion about, I always say, researchers and students at the university, they are at the point where there is no turning back. I mean, they are shaping the technologies, and they need to consider the ethical implications. That there's nobody after them that will do that. You can offload that responsibility. Interpersonal skills, and indeed it is emotional intelligence, empathy, cooperation, and then there are experiences and the way of indeed doing this, and personalized and self-paced learning, and that also is indeed, it goes into the direction of not anymore the industrial era learning with classroom for everybody. Accessible and inclusive learning, which also leads to lifelong learning, and also understanding the university or the learning place as something where you come and go and then go back and then return, and problem-based and collaborative learning, and indeed lifelong and student-driven learning. So this is indeed, and for those of you interested, indeed, the report then identifies 16 schools around the world that are focusing on these areas, and so yeah, what do you think of this, and how does it map onto
Trinity? So I mean, I think all of the you couldn't object to any of the terms. They're all good. I mean, so there are people in Trinity who are many people in Trinity are much more knowledgeable than me on the things that are driving teaching. But there's a few key points here, I think. So I'll take the easy one first. So the lifelong and student-driven learning. So the lifelong learning is definitely something that we are trying to get to grips with. And when you look at a lot of the plans for the university going forward, have you heard of this notion of micro-credentialing?
Yes.
So this is one of these buzzwords that everybody's using at the moment, and essentially it allows you at any time in your life to be able to take a module or a micro module or whatever you want to. And essentially, the only thing that's holding us back in that is the technical systems that underpin it that allow you to register for a module, as distinct from any lack of imagination, our ability to deliver content. So I think so. There's things there that I see from a Trinity point of view. There's also things in terms of creativity skills and global citizen skills. If you look at the TEP characteristics of a student, if you look at things that are happening in Tangent, that they do resonate. What we don't speak about a lot, and I would put this in the inclusive learning. So two things we don't talk about a lot. So first of all, I don't know recently whether people noticed we were trying to focus a little bit on we were doing a whole initiative around how people behave and how respect and dignity, actually, and we ran a few workshops on this, and actually a couple of students contacted me about the fact that they feel the syllabus in Trinity across all our disciplines is completely white. Now, I mean, this is hardly surprising, and we look around the room, we reinforce it more, but it opened something to me that I hadn't been thinking about. And I think in terms of inclusive learning, there's a lot for us to think about more broadly, where we get influenced by greater sources in terms of the material we recommend and talk about. So that's one thing I think that isn't really on the agenda here and needs to be on it more. Maybe it's on it in parts, but the other thing is very much the more informal learning, and I don't know whether that comes under the personalised and self-paced learning there, but I know you've done work on that, and I do think like they're just, when I see it now, when obviously I'm very focused on research and PhDs and upwards, but it's just becoming so difficult. I see, like, it's expensive even if you're funded to do a PhD. It's complicated to live in Dublin. There's stress on the system. The third level sector is like hugely underfunded. So there's part of me sitting there and you're thinking, we are going forward going to have to find totally different ways of engaging with learning and teaching. And some that I think, going back to the fearless thing, that are kind of going to upset us. And I also, and I think of that from every level. So when you think of labs, research labs, when you think of spaces where people research, the idea that we'll be able to afford to maintain them the way they are, the way we do going forward, is very, very challenging. And we might have to rethink what a lab looks like. Does a lab look like something that you carry around in your pocket? Is it really distributed? Is there small spaces throughout the system, whatever the system is? So I think there's things there that resonate with those kind of ideas for me. In our research charter, we have a section where we haven't actually done anything yet, that we're trying to think way more long term about the future of research. And there's again where the Science Gallery, I think, can really help. So that whole idea of kind of the informal learning, different ways of learning that are not just that online learning.
Exactly,
the whole idea of what does a lab of the future look like, and how do you engage, and where the balance of power lies, I suppose, in terms of who dictates to you what you should learn versus what you choose yourself.
Exactly.
So there are things that I haven't grappled with properly at all.
Yeah, no, that's, well, there would be indeed a great opportunity for Science Gallery to investigate that. And and the PhD as well, I have this dream of having a world, global PhD based on the Science Gallery network. I mean, we have, after all, 8 fantastic universities that are doing, that are all invested in this, and it would be fantastic to do.
That's not incompatible with where things are going. So, are people here familiar with the Charm EU project that we're involved in? So that's part of this. Macron introduced this notion of kind of the European network a couple of years ago, and now there's clusters of universities across Europe that are in these little networks, and we're in with 5 universities, and they are looking to the notion of what does it mean to get a degree that's from multiple locations rather than just one. But I think your idea is even more broader, and I think the Dean of Graduate Studies has lots of ideas about remote PhDs as well.
Fantastic.
So I think they're like really interesting ideas coming together that you should definitely contribute
Very
to the
good.
conversation.
Yes,
I think.
and indeed researching what we do in the sense of it's great. Then. At any time, by the way, if you have questions or you want to, just please raise your hand. We'll have, of course, time soon for an open discussion. But at any time, please do that. So again, when I see reports like this one, open the scholarship basically underpins all of this. To me, it seems like a done deal. It is. That's what it is. The other thing I would like to talk with you is what happens next. So in the sense that of course your focus indeed is on the researchers, and research is a career for many of the students in Trinity. We see Science Gallery also in terms, the first step of employment for mediators is something that is in between the academic life and the work life. And while I don't, fully agree with a certain view in education that should only be designed in view of jobs and preparing, the work for the future, that's still, an important part. It's an important part. But what I do like actually is Leadership. And this is, again, a study that was done very recently by the Young Global Leaders. This is a group, indeed, loosely connected with the World Economic Forum. It's basically smart people around the world that can be contacted and feed into ideas. And this is, indeed, just a survey about the elements of, indeed, responsible leadership. That's what everybody from companies to public bodies to academies identify as elements of leadership. And leadership, indeed, is not only the person at the top, it's actually everybody should be a leader in their way of contributing to society. And many actually are in their own research groups, in their own teams, and so. And so these are indeed the 5 elements that have been identified. And of course, when we talk about education and research, we should try to shape people with this characteristic. So inclusiveness, indeed, stakeholder inclusion that is based on trust, accountability, and impact, indeed. And really thinking about including all the stakeholders in the conversation. Emotion and intuition, instinct, humility, compassion, mission and purpose, integrity, system thinking, sense-making, technology and innovation, tech vision, responsible innovation, creativity. I think, the concept of technological literacy is really, and competence is really fundamental. And then intellect and insight, which is kind of the rational part, the data to knowledge, critical thinking, continuous learning. Now, these are the elements, and then we can see here, this is how 3 groups value the importance of these skills. So the green one is the young people. The purple one is the CEOs and the heads of companies of the industry. And the yellow one is the stakeholders. So it's basically the civil society. And what I really like is that indeed, if you look at the young people, they are more extreme in but indeed inclusiveness and stakeholder inclusion is really very important. And mission and being true, being indeed honest and is very important. But also emotion and intuition. Interesting enough, that is actually valued by the industry and the stakeholders more than the rational skills. So again, the question is, what structures and processes and protocols and systems do we have to shape these kind of qualities, and how can indeed open scholarship help in that?
So I would say, broadly speaking, I think the way a lot of universities, ourselves included, are now, I think there is a much wider recognition of the greater number of skills that you need to develop. And we see, so for example, we see, especially going back to your comments about research careers, we see that, for example, the vast majority of people who do PhDs don't end up as professors in universities. So there's a greater, and we have, in Trinity, actually, there's about 850 postdoctoral researchers as well. So we have a lot of people in the system looking at some stage to a research career. But there's a greater emphasis now on getting people to try and understand, I suppose, the skills they have and the transferable nature. We need to do an awful lot more here to make that. There's a woman called Doyle who's head of career services here, and she's doing, I think, an amazing job in the career services, but she's developing a program at the moment that is targeted to people who have PhDs to kind of understand, to stand back and look and understand the various kind of skills that they get through doing that and how that's translated onto, I suppose, the needs of. So I would say not enough happening, but certainly more and more of this kind of stuff is filtering into people's conversation, certainly on the research side. Secondly, I'll just make a comment there. I am worried about the technology and innovation not being high enough, in my point, from the kind of younger people, and I have this for a particular reason. So I'm an engineer myself, and I'm not saying it from an engineering point of view. So I'm saying it kind of from a feminist point of view. So I see the next huge gap that women are making for ourselves is lack of technical literacy in some areas. So I think it doesn't matter whether you're an engineer or you're a computer scientist or whether you're a historian or whether you're an English literature graduate, I think you have to have technical literacy now of some level. You don't have to design filters or write code, but you have to have technical literacy to engage in this world. And you have to especially have technical literacy in a world where algorithms are working on you all of the time, and there's kind of an invisible layer around you. So you can't join in the conversation to talk about the world you want without having some of that technical literacy, I would believe. I believe that very, very strongly. And I wonder sometimes that's another way I think the Science Gallery can play a huge role. I think one thing that's really important in that space is that you make invisible things visible. And a lot of the stuff that happens in the technical world today is very, very invisible. So I would like to see that pushed out more.
Yeah.
I think we are doing things, there's always things happening in the Science Gallery that's about driving technical literacy, and there are other things across Trinity as well, including things like these TEP electives that bring things together from different disciplines. So I think we have some movement there. I would say though the emotion thing also surprises me. I would say that in most places you get the sense, and in most companies, that they still have very traditional views of leadership. So I see the more traditional views of leadership played out around me in here or in the companies we engage in. So I find it very interesting that they are rating that.
Yeah.
And I certainly think there's a lot more work to be done on that front.
Absolutely, yeah, it is. Well, it's also very, very difficult. So you can see that many companies would like to get there, but it's difficult. It's long. Yeah, it's a long way.
And I do think from an open scholarship perspective, again, you know that phrase, if all you have is a hammer, everything you see is a nail. Yeah. So we can get like that, and I'm sure Shane would agree, we get like that about open scholarship. We're kind of obsessed about it. But open scholarship is about stakeholder inclusion. It is about actually mission and purpose hugely. Yep. And mission and purpose is hugely connected to well-being these days and mental well-being. Exactly. And it is about, I suppose, it's obviously about, technology and innovation or whatever, or intellect and insight play a huge role in those. So there's words there that from the Unboxing Open Scholarship I think can resonate in saying engaging in open scholarship practices like on PLOS and platforms like that really encourage especially younger researchers to get involved and to be inclusive, to be open, to be driven by a mission and purpose of their work. Yeah. So I think there's a kind of a vocabulary there we can use to describe that open scholarship as well.
Yeah, yeah. And before we open for comments and questions, you touched on something that is very close to my heart, actually. Activism. The way you spoke about technology and feminism, I think it's a perfect example indeed of the activism that is needed. And I think, we are unboxing, in a sense, this concept of activism because indeed, I think universities are a place of activism. There are always been, a place where these ideas, and we within Trinity also actually can play a big role there. And activism is not, it's not only, and definitely, for us, it's not going on the street and protest, but really working towards social change. Yeah. And in this case, indeed, how can we make indeed technological literacy accessible, open for everybody, not only indeed, because it is, of course, there is a big risk that women are excluded by that for all kind of historical reasons. So I think that is something that calls basically for an activist role.
Yeah, I think so. I personally don't separate research and activism. Yeah. Maybe activism with the small a, in the sense, or maybe very well behaved activism or something. I don't separate those two. So like even when I think of my own world, like I could bore you to death with descriptions of radio wave and spectrum stuff. But the thing for me is it's really interesting to see how that gets converted into policy and how the world changed as a result. So I think there's that kind of way. But I was at a very interesting talk in the Irish Architecture Foundation last night by an architect who was talking about social justice and how architects can help people imagine the future that they want. So I think activism takes lots of different forms in the university space. From helping people to imagine the future, to giving people vocabulary to be able to talk about the future they want, to listening to people. So us not being and this is what open scholarship scholarship is hugely about this two-way dialogue, right? I'm not sitting, well, even though we look like we're sitting here as the oracle, I didn't expect the format to be quite just looking at us, but that we have this two-way dialogue, that open scholarship has that open flow in both directions. That's a critical part of it. And that, to me, is activism, this public-patient engagement.
Yeah.
It's about listening to voices who don't always get listened to. And then there's the more radical forms of activism, which I also think have kind of a role to play. You see it here. I'll give one last example for this. So, there was, and I've used this example a bit recently. Remember recently there was a big sleep out in Trinity. Like anything you do in Trinity, I always get emails about, that's a good idea, and emails like, this is the worst idea ever. So I got a series of emails from some people who were very, very annoyed about it. Because they felt that they had really, really fantastic arguments, and they felt it reduced homelessness to rough sleeping, which we know it's not just that. And they quoted a load of their research and how their research kind of contradicted doing things like this. And I thought it kind of came late in the day, and I wished that it had happened earlier. So over the weekend of the big sleep, we just did something very simple and focused the Twitter feed just on homelessness for the weekend. And that's by no means any great activism. But as one really, I suppose, enlightening thing happened, as I was tweeting the links to various people's research, I suddenly realised I was tweeting links that were not open to everybody. Because sometimes when you're sitting in Trinity, you don't realise that somebody else can't read the link because you've access to something that you're not aware. So very soon afterwards, we made a big effort to make sure we were only sharing things that were open. And subsequently, Niamh Brennan did a lot of work in making more things open and put together a group of work that people have done in Trinity about homelessness and and issues around that to make it more open. So there is an activism that's at the heart of open scholarship for me that's really, really important. And it was funny in that moment. It's like I knew this to be a fact, but it was funny in the moment, kind of living it and saying, oh my God, the very people who need this information have no access to it. And nor necessarily have we it written in a way that's accessible. So I think, I suppose in summary, activism can have all different shapes and forms. And I think there's a huge role.
Yeah, exactly, And we can also rely on the artists that work with us that can amplify that message and bring it also indeed communicate in ways that are accessible
Make
to
us all feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly. Yes,
in a good way.
In a good way, absolutely. Yes. And also, the Science Gallery actually is really good at making things, say, intellectually accessible, which is not dumbing down and simplifying. It's really making it accessible for.
I think you should make it intellectually accessible and more uncomfortable going forward.
Exactly.
That would be my call. I think an awful lot of the stuff here is, is welcoming and warm and should be. But I think the time is to step it up a gear in terms of that kind of critical space. I think it could be. I think there's huge scope for that, and there's huge intelligence and talent to do that. So.
Sure. Yep. No, that's great. So the time for questions, comments, dissent, and consent. Yes.
I really like this idea to make visible invisible. I think there is a huge potential. And one area I've noticed that actually our research, to a large extent, it's a bit controversial to say, but it is invisible to in wide, to industry, to businesses. Like I've been talking to some people whose job is to promote collaboration with businesses, and they said businesses have no time to read our papers. It's so hard, it's so frustrating, and of course they are aware of this open access or lack of it. So even if you access paper X, it refers to another 10 where maybe the real thing is contained, and it's the same. And the question is, how can we make that visible? I mean, if we can't do it, who else can we do? And this is part of the reason is this lack of conservatism, like people don't like to embrace new technologies, but having some open platform where we exchange this could be one way. So what is your view, and how would you see it actually happening in practical terms, and what can be done on our part?
So So I have multiple views on that. So I suppose one view I have that sits on top of it is that the whole world wants everything reduced to a soundbite at this stage, and some of my answer is, look, there isn't a shortcut, you just have to engage. There's part of the answer is that. The other part of the answer is that, and I know you're a real believer in having platforms that we use. I think all of us in different ways, including here in the Science Gallery, do spend a lot of time trying to make research accessible in different ways. The big challenge I find, right, is a time issue. So the biggest complaint, if you look across Trinity and you ask people what do they want with research, they say, I just want to get on with my research. Would you give me the time to get on with my research? So all of this additional work where you take the research and you process it in a way that other people can understand it is very time consuming. And I worry, so I really believe in it. I think it's important, but I worry about the added stress that this causes, an added burden that's constantly the case.
How can we make it less time consuming?
Well, the Science Gallery could help us to do it more effectively. I mean, I think there are no shortcuts. It's all of the usual ways. There isn't a shortcut to individuals having to spend some time on it. I agree with you that, yeah, you can. There's various platforms that are useful to do it. I think the citizen science and citizen scholarship approaches that that some people do and that we're planning to do further will allow to do, I think, the public patient initiative. So there isn't one way you do it, unfortunately. There's many, many different ways. And we've people right through the college actually working on all of those. I always feel we have brilliant examples of this. We just don't have it systematized enough, so there's more to do on that side too. Yeah. I know it's a very complicated answer.
Let's see. Yes.
Thanks. Thank you for a really interesting discussion. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on that point and just to add from my experience in trying to get these kind of critical concepts into the public sphere, and I'm kind of working at the social science policy interface. For me, and it is really time consuming, and for me it's all about the emotion and intuition bit and building relationships. That's the key to it for me. So it's about building those relationships with the people in the public sphere that we want to influence, and then presenting ourselves in a way that make them more willing to engage, and not just willing to engage with us, but make them curious and want to engage with us. It is extremely time consuming, but without putting that time in and building those relationships, then you're absolutely right. Like, people like policymakers don't have time to read our research. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is around, it's about that personal kind of face-to-face contact, having the conversations where you're having very informal discussions, but these critical concepts are coming up, and then finding ways to kind of channel those, maybe more formal channels in the future, which comes through the building of those relationships.
And I think Ruth, we've had discussions before. Ruth has taken me to task, rightly so, about some of this, but there's an awful lot of work that's about that relationship building and that emotional intelligence that you need to lay the groundwork for, that goes unrecognised. And that's a problem as well. And I think it goes to the open scholarship discussion as well. There's just so many things you do around the research process that are hugely valuable to creating the impact you want, but maybe are slow, maybe are time consuming, and are invisible. Not just the research itself, it's the processes around it. And we in the system we currently don't have a way of cherishing, acknowledging or rewarding that, I think is a big issue.
Thanks so much, Linda and Andrea, for this really inspiring discussion. I'd like to offer a few comments that stem from my particular position. I am a Trinity lecturer, but I'm also working as a mediator at Science Gallery. And the way I see it, Science Gallery and Trinity could not have been more different. Starting with Science Gallery, it's really incredible that this idea of some sort of diversity and inclusion and this kind of horizontal kind of relationship that we have with one another. So this kind of idea that when you are a mediator, you still have the sense that your ideas will get heard. And it's kind of really incredible, and this kind of feedback loop that there's lots of procedures in place at Science Gallery through which we can grow as a kind of institution and actually hear the feedback and act on it, right? Unfortunately, from my experience, Trinity does not fare favorably.
I was expecting that to be the second.
No, I think those things need to be said. It's not a coincidence that last week there was a kind of a wave of student strikes that, strikes of university staff and students that swept the UK, including University of Manchester and also Goldsmith. And for some reason, it's not happening in Ireland. And from my experience working in the humanities in Trinity, there's, I'd say, what you were saying about social justice, actually it's struck a raw nerve, because I'm a kind of early career scholar, kind of working on a casual payroll. And basically what happens at Trinity, there's a kind of casualization of work, unfair kind of workloads, stymieing prospects of promotion, this practices of stonewalling, and also this kind of some sort of discriminatory practices. So I was thinking, like, when you're saying that, okay, it's all about lifelong learning, unboxing education, but on some level there will be people that will be, teaching, right? So it's not that it's just this learning, it's this kind of there will be people who will, do the teaching, right? So that people can learn. So, like, we are just like subtracting, those, stuff from the equation, right? So I'd say I kind of really appreciate your thoughts in the matter, and I would see how Trinity would tackle this kind of, inequality and social justice at home, right? And then so that we can just, think about that. Thank you.
Do you want to say? So I think you're very brave to say the things that you say, and I think they are worth pointing out. And in a way, it is kind of hypocritical to be talking about open scholarship in the context of that kind of equity and be in a system that doesn't have that everywhere. I do. So I suppose I think there, as I said when we started off in this conversation, we're in an old university, we have a history, we've carried many things, and I think there's lots of things that need to change, without a doubt. Might sound like a bit of a trivial answer. I found, for example, the unboxing open scholarship processes and engagement to be one thing that helps us move forward. So I don't know, I don't want to put words in the mouth of the people here from the library, but for example, I do think there's all sorts of different classes of citizen in Trinity. And there's all sorts of barriers and all sorts of, I suppose, there can be lack of mutual respect. So I found it very productive working with the library and the people in the library on the unboxing thing, because I think that, for me, as part of driving down, we'll say, a barrier between, research, the kind of more typical research academic world and the library world, which I think should be very, very close. And I think through this of becoming closer. So it's just one small example of the way things can change. Fundamentally, so I can't really answer your questions here about the precarious work situations we have. I think we have a lot of them in Trinity. I think we have some that we have very little hope of doing anything about because of the national landscape and the resource structure we work in. And I think we have others that we have potential to do things about, and that can be tidied up. And that's as much as I can say at the moment without going into minute detail. The other thing I'd just add, in our research charter, we set out a research charter and we put a set of principles in that charter because we felt it was very important to kind of reassert what it is we believe in. And one of those is about respecting diversity and different modes of research. So in that context as well, when you talk about, I suppose, I wouldn't necessarily use the word social justice there, but in that context, if you look across the university, we've always come from a tradition where certain forms of research are considered better than other forms, and in any discipline anyway. I mean, I often describe this, in the area I'm in, I'm considered a dirty engineer versus the people who do the pure kind of mathematical or physicists. And then if you go to other areas, the engineer is considered, oh, well, I'm more useful than that historian sitting over there. So there's all these kind of biases and inequalities in the system. And I mean, certainly from a research point of view, we're doing everything we can to loudly and clearly state that all modes of research are important, that being excellent in whatever way excellent looks like in your field is important, and doing our best to make sure that that's echoed in the system, but it is slow work. So I could talk about this topic for 100 hours and go off in many different lines, but there's just a couple of things to say, but we could talk more if you want afterwards.
That's great.
Yeah.
Sorry, there was Jane first.
Linda, you mentioned that technology and innovation are areas that have caused a bit of a feminist problem.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering what do you think has caused this kind of knowledge disparity? How do you think institutions and individuals can address that?
So I suppose the obvious things that cause it is that there's a certain imbalance in certain disciplines where there's more men than women. But the second thing for me, so if I look at any decision, going back to activism, if you look at any decision that our government has to make, in my opinion today, all decisions are technical. So it doesn't matter whether it's a technical decision about, something to do with the economy and, interest rates are various different kinds of, technical approaches to easing the financial situation, or whether it's about installing, broadband, rural broadband, or whether it's about smart cities, or whether it's about the environment. So increasingly it's the case that you require a certain amount of technical knowledge. You don't have to be the designer of the systems, but you increasingly require a certain amount of technical knowledge to be able to be included in a conversation, let alone inform and influence the conversation. And I just think the whole world has gotten more technical, and I mean it that way, if you know what I mean. And I think just given the disparity of some of the, if you look at the disciplines of computer science or engineering or things like that, you'll see big disparities there. And when I also look at the things that are, are driving a lot of our conversation now, like, the Cambridge Analytica type world where we're influenced, like the echo chamber of Facebook and things like that, I think that calls for you to be able to converse in a technical way more than it did before. So I think that's caused it, plus the fact we have imbalances in certain amounts of these disciplines. And I would always say to people that it is incumbent on us to be technically literate, to be able to engage in those conversations. And I think what we can do is more of what you guys are doing already, and more of what various other people are doing in outreach here, and making an effort to I suppose to be better at explaining. And not that I've done it well in that answer there, but you know what I mean. So I do see this as being the next gap. I mean, I always say we have, and I was mentioning it at a thing we were at the other day, like there is no, if you think of a city now and a smart city, there is no one who's in charge of algorithms for the city. There's no director of algorithms. There's no one in charge of emergent behaviour that happens because algorithms were all set off in the opposing directions without any necessary menace to start off with. So it's a very, very different world with a technical, to me there's a technical layer, a digital layer on top of every physical layer as well, and that's why I think people need that vocabulary.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's another question for Linda. You mentioned micro-credentials.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things we're exploring here in Science Gallery, more in our kind of work with secondary school students, is looking at informal learning, non-formal learning, and the possibility or whether there is a need for credentials, something to kind of support the quality, but also support the achievement, the skills development. So if that was something that, let's say, us or other organisations like us were to develop, is there a way for the university to ever recognise those kind of credentials? And is that something that we could explore?
So I definitely think yes. I mean, I'm not the exact right person to be answering this in the sense of go ahead and do it this way, but there is an absolute appetite on all fronts, including actually from government, that the ability for you to be able to dip in and out of things as appropriate at all stages of your career to happen. So absolutely, and I think there's huge scope for you to expand in that way. And this goes as well, you know, people talk about now that apparently you have 7 careers or something over your lifetime, so it speaks to that kind of thing. It speaks to the fact that we don't know what the jobs of the future are going to look like. And it just also speaks to, I don't know whether you saw some of the research that the Tilda people did recently about this whole idea of that, you know, if you're intellectually stimulated or you do some learning as you get older, that's really important. So it speaks to all of those things. So absolutely, yes. And I can point you in
any direction would be very much appreciated.
Yeah. Yeah, do you have a comment then?
Just quick, to the subject of disparity and engineers versus fewer.
That was.
I can mention one concrete reason why I don't think it works. The reason we lack collaboration. We, as pure mathematicians, we are not receiving the theoretical problems from the engineering side, not at the level, not at the amount that we can process them. Like, I talk to many colleagues in fellows who are engineers and say, oh, actually I have this interesting problem, we should talk about it. Guess what? It never happens. People just don't have the time. Time is the hardest problem to address, and this is really the problem we should start addressing. Like, everyone has talents, ideas, there is no lack of it. Time is the worst, and so we have to find a way to make it efficient. And again, maybe I'm repeating myself, but it boils down to the platform, to the system. And this is what Lina mentioned, that you should be more technical, but I think a high level of system should also work with people with less technical background. Like, all this abstraction people have against using system is that because they had bad experience with some complex system. But this is just more reason to improve. So do you agree that this is the key challenge?
No, and I think time is the key challenge, but I think this is going to sound like a totally personal comment, I think you have a utopian view of what a shared platform can offer us, because I think the way people communicate is just so multimodal. But I do think time is the key thing, and I actually, in our research strategy, we have one of our, Jenny, you might remember, we've one heading, reconstruct time and space as one of our. We haven't managed to do that yet.
Yes, there is one more comment there, and then I think we'll close and we can continue the conversations outside.
Hi there. I'm just interested in the question to Linda. You're talking about more diverse researchers and valuing different types of research. Just wonder, is there any kind of measures to support the research and scholarship of those who are practitioners, say your professional doctorates or your part-time PhDs, whose research comes from the world of work, feeding that back in? Because it sounds like open scholarship is very one-way, what we do outwards.
You're right, actually, that maybe open scholarship and a lot of the stuff that people are concerned with starts with say, the traditional practices, gets to try people to incorporate that in a new space. So I would say, so first of all, there is loads of research that has a very practical element and that does actually take account of the kind of the practice-based, the practical and stuff that comes in from the outside, I have to say. And there's tons of people across Trinity that either are engaging in research that way or doing research on those kinds of topics. It's a separate issue as whether it's all equally valued or rewarded. That's a separate thing still. Now, what we have done over the last number of years, there's a much broader understanding of what good research looks like. There's much more nuanced understanding, and people are much more sensitive to different fields. And that really, you see that's a world phenomenon that has evolved. So, for example, we've better ways of understanding, the fact if you're doing research and you write plays or you compose music. Likewise, we have better understanding of research if you're actually doing, I suppose, practically engaging in it. We've more to do to get it more recognised in the system more regularly, without a doubt. And we face the usual problem of comparing apples and oranges in everything we do. That all obviously stems back to resourcing. If you've only so many resources and you can only promote, I'll use it in a promotion example, you're constantly trying to compare apples and oranges, and it's a very, very difficult thing to do. So I would say, there's loads of the kind of concerns you're interested in. You see lots of that around, and you see people talking about it more and more. So I see it as positive movement in that direction. But going back to your open scholarship is supposed to be two-way in many ways. including, as I said, that exchange of information is supposed to be two ways. So if you've got ideas of areas where it's falling down in that, I'd love to follow up with them as well. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I think we should stop here, but it's been a really wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for the time here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shane and Mairead, for making this possible. If I'm not mistaken, there is lunch outside, so we can in the studios. So it's outside of that. We can continue the conversation there. Again, thank you so much. And to all of you, indeed, this is also the time to shape the future of Science Gallery. So inspired by the words indeed of Linda and the process, please feed those thoughts to us, because indeed that's what we are here for. So thank you so much.
Thank you.